welcome to Healthcare Triage Live. For the first time in a while, I feel like we weren't doing like something that made me totally angry right before we went on the air, which is yay, we're gonna have a good show. And of course, it's never anybody here that does anything. It's just somebody brings up something that like makes us want to go on a tweet storm, whatever. Like, what's your thing? The tweet storm?
Tweet storm.
No, but what is like you usually say? Like,
check the forecast.
Right, check the forecast. Here comes the tweet storm. Anyway, yes. So. Welcome to Healthcare Triage Live. As people continue to join us, we'll just do our usual housekeeping. This is our 1 year anniversary of being on Patreon, so pretend I'm pulling one of those poppers like we usually do. We forgot to do it, and I don't know, maybe we didn't want to do the cleanup. Regardless, it's a year. We cannot thank you enough for your support. We truly appreciate it. It's helped us to do lots of stuff. We just did Opioid Month. We did that with some help from external funding, which was awesome. It's the kind of thing that makes the show better and us to be able to reach a larger audience. So we truly appreciate it. Facebook.com/healthcaretriage, HCTmerch.com. Any little bit helps for supporting the show. You really, we couldn't do it without you. Let's jump right into questions. Question number 1 comes from Bored Boar. Is human height mostly genetic? Yes, mostly. Now, of course, other things are going to come into play. Nutrition, some diseases can have an effect on height. Some metabolic problems could have an effect on height. But the best predictor of how tall you're going to be is some measure of, between how big your parents are. And so mostly genetic. Doesn't mean entirely genetic, but mostly genetic. And I often will see kids in clinic where parents are really nervous because like their kids at the 5th or 10th percentile, and I turn to the parents and they're both like 5 foot, 5'2", and you're like, yeah, that's where your kids are probably going to be. There's no expectation that if you are very short, your kids are going to be very tall. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. My middle child, Noah, is like always been like at the 95th percentile. No Carol has ever been at the 95th percentile. So that's got to be Schumann genes over there. Anyway. Evil King Gumby. Are there any studies on taking sleep-inducing products like melatonin or ZZZquyl? Long-term hazards. Is that an actual thing or is that NyQuil?
It's just NyQuil. It's out the cold medicine.
Oh, and it's called ZZZquyl?
Yeah.
Well, that stuff works. Alcohol will put you to sleep. Melatonin, I think, does have some evidence behind it. Medications will make you drowsy. Yeah, not acetaminophen. Diphenhydramine, the stuff in Benadryl, definitely makes you sleepy. Long-term hazards. Well, it depends on what you're using. Melatonin, I don't know if there have been real studies on long-term hazard. Most people don't use that like hugely and chronically, so I don't know. ZZZquyl, I mean, there's alcohol in that, right? Unless they've changed the formulation. I'm pretty sure that, well, regardless. Diphenhydramine, stuff like that. So there have been studies that we've discussed on Healthcare Triage that look at the use of anticholinergics and links to Alzheimer's and stuff, and I have argued that could be an association. We're not sure it's causal. A lot of those drugs are much more powerful than the quote-unquote sleep-inducing medication ones, but, that's there. So when you're weighing potential harms and benefits long-term, I guess that could be an issue. If you're having trouble sleeping, there are other steps you should take in addition to medication. My upshot and blog colleague Austin Frack has written at least once for the New York Times on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's been proven to work. And he's written on the blog about that quite a bit as well. There are other reasons that you could have trouble sleeping. It could have to do with diet. It could have to do with other things you're doing, drugs, alcohol, not having proper sleep hygiene. So lots of things to look at. You should talk to your doctor. But I would not necessarily run to chronic medication used to help you sleep. Humans should be able to sleep. We're wired to do so. Zach Smith. Everyone's getting nutritionists or naturopaths food sensitivity tests. I dispute that. I don't think everyone is. Could be everybody but not everyone. Is it evidence-based? An overextended health claim? Or totally bogus? Your guess is totally bogus. What do I think? I hesitate to say totally bogus, but yeah, mostly. Well, yeah, it's close. It's close. Well, bogus in the idea that there's no science behind it. Totally bogus. People can have allergies. People can have, sensitivities to food. It does exist. But when you're talking about naturopaths and nutritionists, naturopathy, remember, is built in the idea that you should be getting tiny quantities of the stuff that you don't. So like they could be looking for very, very tiny levels of sensitivity. I don't know about these tests. People who are worried that they have allergies should be tested. But usually you go to a doctor and they determine if your sensitivities and your allergies are so drastic that you actually need the allergy testing. Because sometimes just stop what it is. But it also depends what your problem is. Is it like you have terrible, hives and weight loss and diarrhea and vomiting? Yeah, I would get tested. Is it that you just feel a little bit meh? I don't know if I would do that. But I am skeptical of widespread food sensitivity testing without, a good hypothesis and diagnosis and test with good test characteristics and a plan on what you're going to do with the results. Because you shouldn't be getting tests without knowing what they are. We've done at least 1 or 2 episodes on that as well. Vaibhav Gupta. How much weight should we give to the studies about brain mapping? For example, I recently saw a study where they fMRI'd subjects and tried to tell if they were liberal or conservative with help of brain patterns. All right, so I was borderline on board with you right up until that last bit. Because, of course, liberal or conservative does not require a structural brain difference. I was raised reasonably conservative. I went to an all-boys school for 12 years. 12 years of an all-boys private school. I wore a jacket and tie every year from 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Jacket and tie. I remember my class had a mock vote for the election in 1984, and Dukakis got 1 vote, which is slightly better than he did, I guess, in the general election. But anyway, I was a pretty conservative guy, and then in college, I don't think I was reasonably conservative, but by the time I got to residency and then fellowship, I started to drift the other direction. Then now, in Indianapolis, there are days I feel like I could be running the Green Party. But in Seattle, I was pretty moderate. So, part of that is that's not this is what you are, that's your brain. Obviously, you can change your political persuasion. There are tons of people who have changed from liberal to conservative or conservative to liberal or Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican. So the idea that you can nail down someone's brain, take a scan, and by physical or by you say, well, this person's liberal or conservative. So I don't know if I believe that. However, certainly some parts of the brain do serve different functions. And if that's what we're talking about, then there's probably some truth to that, and using fMRI could do that. So brain mapping in general, the idea that there are parts of the brain which might have certain skills or functions that other parts don't, that I believe. The idea that you can take a scan of someone's brain and start making predictions about their personality and everything else, that is much more sketchy, and I don't think we're there yet at all. Jacket and tie for 6 years. 6 years. Sherato Grace. Also the idea, my 3rd grade teacher was Mrs. Cleaves, and the next time I had a female teacher was my 12th grade AP physics, teacher. All men. It's crazy. Sherato Grace, what can you tell me about treating ADHD in adults? What worked for me as a kid doesn't seem to help as much as it used to now that I'm older. Well, you need to talk to your doctor. So first of all, let me say that right up front. But if I'm speaking generally, ADHD is one of those things that, it is not a guarantee that the medication works. When I was in Seattle, we used to do N of 1 trials whenever we were putting a kid on methamphetamines. We would literally run a randomized controlled trial of the child, where they would go to the pharmacy, we'd write a prescription for the N of 1 trial, and they would get 3 sets of pills, and they couldn't tell which were which. One was placebo, one was 1 dose of methamphetamine, and the other was the high dose. And they would get them in a random order, and then we would ask the parents to do Vanderbilts with the schools for 2-week periods on each of the drugs so that we could see which worked. Sometimes it was the no medication, sometimes it was the high dose, but that, because it didn't work well for everyone. And as you probably know, as a person with ADHD, you often have to titrate the medications. Sometimes this one works for this one, sometimes that one works for that one. Sometimes other things come into play. You can outgrow a dose. As an adult, it might be different. And maybe you need more cognitive, functioning or behavioral therapy or something else to help you function. It's also a spectrum. I don't doubt that I'm probably somewhere on the ADHD spectrum and that I self-medicate by having 20 things going on at a time. I'm almost always watching TV while I work. I never sit in silence. I don't know if I've always felt like that's just occupying some part of my brain so that I can get the rest of it focused. I don't know. But you should talk to your doctor, because it is absolutely makes sense that what worked for you as a kid might not help as much as an adult. And maybe you need a different medication. Maybe you need something besides medication. Maybe you need just a change in your work environment or whatever it is. But you should talk to your doctor. And I should stop banging on the table. Althena Luna, how would you recommend bringing up or pointing out fat shaming to a doctor who repeatedly deflects my questions and discussion of a chronic medical issue to talk about my weight despite being unrelated? So I'm going to talk about sort of this is a complex question, and I appreciate what you're saying. So there's two things going on. One, I completely sympathize and I get and I empathize with the idea that you want to talk about something else and your doctor's not listening to you. That's a problem. Because your doctor should absolutely, listen to your concerns and make sure that he or she addresses them in talking to you about a chronic medical issue. 100% agree. He or she is not listening. In the same vein, however, your doctor probably feels the same way about you. And this isn't, I'm saying that one is right or wrong, but your doctor probably believes that perhaps your weight, I don't know, is a medical issue that your doctor feels you're perhaps deflecting and not addressing and wants to keep coming back to you. So I think probably there's a little bit of both. Now again, it's like you're asking me to make a judgment value when I've never met you. I have no idea what's truth and nothing else. So if what I'm saying is not true, fine, that's possible. But I do talk to a lot of patients who don't want to talk about the issues like smoking, like drinking, like alcohol, like drugs, like obesity, like firearms. There are many, I've written about that. There are many issues that patients are like, no, talk to me about that. And you're like, but that's the biggest problem I see in your life. That's the one that I want to talk to you about. That doesn't mean, however, that you don't also need to listen to your patients and make sure that you address the concerns that are of value to them as well, because both sides are probably correct. Now, if he's fat shaming you, if he's really, being derogatory, or she's being derogatory, or talking about this in a bad way, that's totally separate. Fat shaming is never, okay. But it should be acknowledged that the doctors do have a valid concern about patients who are obese in discussing to them perhaps diet and nutrition in order to try to get a handle on the problem to reduce their chance of other problems in life, especially if you have certain chronic medical conditions. And I don't know what yours is. So I would try to be a little more open-minded to the idea that the doctor may be speaking in your best interest. Now, of course, that assumes that they're not fat shaming, while also you being correct and trying to talk to your doctor about it, making sure that he or she acknowledges that your concerns are valid and that you want to talk about the things that are important to you. Midnight SG. My 1-year-old isn't babbling yet. When I told the doctor, he told me babies sometimes don't talk till 2 to 3. Is that also with babbling? Oh, I never want to make medical diagnoses of patients directly, so you should talk to your doctor. However, in general, a child should be babbling by 1 year of age. If they're not, there are certain things you'd always be concerned about. One is hearing, to make sure that they actually hear well. Another could be that, they're getting the proper developmental stimulation. And usually if babies or infants are falling behind on their developmental scales or they're where we expect them to be, there are certain activities and things you can do with them. Sometimes kids are referred to, what we call OTPT, but basically it's, occupational physical, occupational therapy, whatever it is, to try to, offer you other suggestions on how to bring them on developmentally. I will say that most babies do catch up. And so those that are behind do. Our first child, Jacob, did not walk until he was I want to say 15, 16 months. I believe in my heart that was because we lived in a shoebox in Seattle and everything he needed was within arm's reach, so he had no incentive to walk, and that we were visiting my in-laws who had an actual house, and then all of a sudden he needed to get somewhere, and that's when he got up and walked. But so he caught up, and today he runs around just fine. But he was at the time delayed. Babbling not at 1 year is behind. And talking till 2 to 3 is not true. Sometimes it is true, but it's like babies are usually getting words. So usually the rule of thumb is by By 2, you can even understand 50% of what a baby says. By 3, you can understand like 75% of what a baby says. But they're talking way before then, with many words, way before then. And so I wouldn't be like, oh, don't worry about it until you're 2 to 3. I would absolutely talk to your physician and get a second opinion if you have to see what you might want to be doing in order to help your baby develop. Just looking at my watch, seeing what time it is. Realize I still have the teleprompter on from before. Finlay Beaton. What are the chances of passing IBD to your child if one parent has Crohn's? Should you worry about this? The meds are not cheap. Okay, so the meds not being cheap are the least thing I'd be worried about. These things run in families. My mother has ulcerative colitis. I have ulcerative colitis. My brother has Crohn's. That's bad luck. That's a lot of it. So there is a chance. Is it genetic that like we know what gene it's on, and we don't know it's dominant or recessive, or we say you have 50%. It's not like that clean. But there does seem to be a familial aspect to inflammatory bowel disease. If you have Crohn's, there's a possibility greater than it would otherwise be that your child has Crohn's. Having said that, again, there's lots of problems with having IBD. The cost of the medications would not be the first. Some of the medications, not all the medications are expensive. My medication is actually pretty cheap. That doesn't mean it's not a concern, but I would be much more concerned about health than the medications, especially since most of those should be covered to a large extent by insurance. And now I feel like I'm getting off on a topic I don't want to get to, because I don't want to minimize the cost of medications. They're huge, and medications and the cost to families can be enormous. But I'd still be focused on the health aspects first. And that's what I'd be worried about. Talk to your doctor. Watch your kid. There's not much you can do to prevent it. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I wouldn't get too panicked about it. People lead awesome, full lives with inflammatory bowel disease. My brother has it. I think Hank has talked about it many times. Hank Green has ulcerative colitis. His life seems pretty awesome. So there's lots and lots and lots of people who have, full, long, totally awesome lives with IBD, so I wouldn't be panicked about it as like a terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy, but you want to be on the lookout and you want to be sure you manage it best. So this has been a long speech about your simple question was, there's an increased chance if you have IBD that your child might. Need a name 27. Healthcare triage. I was recently bit by a venomous spider and I went to urgent care and got treated. Then I went to my GP a few days later, but I was told it was just my anxiety acting up, diagnosed GAD. Is there anything I can do to prevent this from happening? Okay, are you sure it was GAD? So good. This is a good story too. So when I lived in Seattle, I went to get firewood with a friend because they had like a farm on, I think it was like Bainbridge Island or something. They had lots of trees and we were going to cut down trees and make firewood, and we used a chainsaw. And my wife was really upset about this and said Aaron Carroll is not meant to use a chainsaw, and she was correct. When I put on like the hard hat to like use the chainsaw, I put the hard hat on, and then I felt this like sting on my head, and I was like, oh, what's that? And then I used the chainsaw, which I will never do again. The next day when I woke up, there was like a horn growing out of my head and my lymph nodes were like so big, and I was like, what? I'm going to die. I thought I had leukemia. And I went to the NICU where I was on service, and they were like, get out of here. I don't know what you got, but we can't let the babies get that. And I went to the ER, and the ER was like, I don't know what you got, but get out of here. And I panicked and I panicked. And I had a GI doctor appointment the next day for my ulcerative colitis. And when I went there, my GI doc said, oh my God, how did you get bit by a brown recluse spider? And I was like, what was this? And he immediately recognized this was the lesion of a brown recluse spider. I have since learned that's a horrible thing to get. So this thing on my forehead went necrotic. My brother called me the unicorn for quite a bit. You can still see a scar if you get really close to me. But that was all I had. But people have like lost extremities from this. It's terrible. Like, so a bite from a venomous spider is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. My wife still thinks that was God's way of punishing me for using a chainsaw. I don't know that I believe that that's true, but regardless, I'm not going to do it again. So I wouldn't dismiss the idea you got bit by a venomous spider. You might have been, and in case that's good to go to urgent care and get treated. So I don't know that it's just your generalized anxiety. I don't know what symptoms you had. If I had seen this thing on my forehead and the lymph nodes, and someone had said to me, well, that's your GAD, I would have been pretty pissed, because it was not. So I don't know. But if you were bit by a venomous spider and you went to urgent care and got treated, that's totally appropriate. So is there anything you can do to prevent this from happening? Don't get bit by a venomous spider, or in my case, don't use a chainsaw. NPO123 lives in Canada, where some provinces have stopped paying doctors for performing annual physical exams. The evidence seems to point out that annual physicals do not affect morbidity and mortality. I want to know what you think. Thank you for all your hard work in healthcare triage. Thank you for watching. Here's the thing. And I'm a pediatrician, so we do a crap load of physical exams. And every once in a while they come out with one of these great studies that does prove that the physical exam and the well-care visit does not contribute to mortality and sometimes even to morbidity. That, for healthy people, they're not necessary. That the chronic disease management aspects help, but not everything else. But here's the thing. Not everything is morbidity and mortality. And some things are prevention, and some things are so downstream that, you don't want to avoid it. Well-care visits are when we do vaccines, and vaccines are hugely important. Could we separate them? Sure. Well-care visits are often where people get their sports physicals, especially kids. Could we separate that? Sure. Well-care visits are often when we talk about nutrition, and obesity is a huge problem. And could we take that out? Sure. Well-care visits are where we talk about, anticipatory guidance and injury prevention. And could we separate those things out into something separate? Sure. Well, I think you can see where I'm going. I could take all these things out that we do at the physical exam or the well-care visit and institutionalize them into the public health system or some other way and not do that annual exam, physical exam. But that's not how our healthcare system works. We don't have all these things set up. So we can either work to set all these things up, or we can continue to do the yearly physical well-care exam. We don't pay that much for those. Those are the point of contacts for doctors. It's sometimes when people can get their prescriptions filled. It's sometimes when they can talk about nutrition. It's sometimes the only time they can talk about mental health. It's sometimes the only time they can talk about behavior for children, or do developmental screening, or do autism screening, or check and make sure that people got their yearly colonoscopy, or make sure that women are getting their annual pap. They don't need all new pap, but whatever things that they need for their gynecological care. To make sure that we talk about pregnancy, and that we make sure we talk about sex and contraception. To make sure that we talk about harm reduction. And I think all of these things can take place, and they all can't be linked to morbidity and mortality, but that's the best thing. We've got to do all of those things. So this is one of those where it's like, is there a randomized controlled trial proving this works? No. But we don't have a mechanism to do all of those things I just mentioned in the other way. So in this imperfect world that we have, the annual exam and visit is sort of the best way that we can do those things. That's why you don't see me standing on a ledge screaming that we shouldn't do physicals in kids or that we shouldn't do well-care exams. Now, do I believe that listening to the heart and lungs in healthy children truly impacts their life? No, I don't. And I think if we got rid of some of the more borderline aspects of the physical exam that don't seem to, we could, but we wouldn't save any money because we'd still need to do the rest of the visit. So I don't scream about that. There you go. Just checking my watch for the time. Liz Barino says, how much damage is typically done if the brain is cut off from oxygen for less than a minute? Not much. I mean, people hold their breath for a minute all the time underwater. Or are you talking about no blood for a minute? That's totally different. Like, if I block the carotids for a minute, you're going to pass out and you're going to see something. Long term, I'm not sure. But if you're talking about if I hold my breath for a minute, not much. There's this handy rule of threes. You can live for about 3 weeks without food. You can live for 3 days without water. You can live for 3 minutes without oxygen. You can live for 3 seconds without blood. So that's, no blood is a terrible, terrible thing. And if your brain's not getting blood and not getting oxygen, it's not going to die in 3 seconds, but is that right? 3 minutes, 3 seconds? Yeah, 3 seconds. So it's that's no blood in your entire body. So I don't know what you're asking me. If you're asking me about holding your breath, not having oxygen for a minute, most people would be fine and recover okay. Not having your brain completely cut off from oxygen for a minute, that could be a problem, especially if you're talking about restricting blood flow for a minute. That could be a real problem. Justin Soon. Oh no, Justin. I've heard lots of talk about oil pulling or oil gargling as a way of whitening teeth or maintaining dental hygiene. Is there any scientific basis for this? No. None. Plus, why do you want to do this? It's the 20 minutes of swishing or whatever. Why? Does brushing bother you that much? I mean, really? No. There's nothing for this at all. Oil pulling or oil gargling, there's no science. You're not getting the toxins out. It's not like it. No. Just no. Liz Barino, can you please tell me more about amputees' phantom pain? How bad is it generally? How often does it occur? The lower limb amputation, if that matters. It's variable. So this is where someone has, let's say you lose a limb, let's say below the knee, but you still feel the foot or feel the pain, because of course nerves aren't just in the foot, they run all the way up the body, and so the same kind of signals can sometimes get sent from here on up to the brain that make you think, your brain fool into thinking that there's pain, there's a foot, there's something there. And of course, how do you fix that? Because it's not like I can change that. That's like your nerves, and so that can be a real problem for some amputees. But it's a total variable thing. Some people experience none, some experience a ton. So how bad is it generally? It depends. How often does it occur? I'm not even sure that I know that there are statistics on prevalence and incidence and all of that. It does occur. It can be a real problem for some. Unfortunately, we probably have to manage it on a patient-by-patient basis. S. Dufresne 31. I have a question. What's the likelihood that I will need to deliver via C-section if I have scoliosis? Also, what are the odds of a curvature worsening due to pregnancy? So, I don't know about that question with the C-section and scoliosis. I'm going to guess I wouldn't think it would matter too much. Your scoliosis is bad in childhood, and it gets worse sort of in puberty the last few years as you grow. But once you finish puberty and everything locks in place, for the most part, things stay pretty stable. That's why if you can exit puberty with a scoliosis not severe enough to warrant surgery, you usually never need surgery because it doesn't worsen in adulthood that way. Now, when you get to, of course, elderly age, osteoporosis, everything can go crazy. But, in adulthood, it doesn't move in that same way. It really is sort of we know what you're entering puberty. We hope you don't worsen too much during puberty. But once you lock it down at the end of puberty, that's sort of where it is. So I don't think that scoliosis worsens much during pregnancy for that reason. However, I don't actually have an answer for you in whether it makes it more likely to need to diversify by a C-section. My gut would tell me no, unless it was truly, truly severe. But it's certainly something to talk to your OB-GYN about. Jack Azamazin. How does Aaron feel about the longevity movement? Luigi Fontana has a fascinating work on calorie restriction. We also have Aubrey de Grey doing work to fix the problems with molecular approaches. So, there are a lot of things that people have shown are associated with increased lifespan. Of course, for a long time everybody was like, oh, it's the I can't remember what it's called. It's the stuff in the organic food. It's the I don't want to say electrolytes, but what is it? It's the free radicals. It's the free radicals. It's the free radicals that are going to make you live long. It hasn't panned out at all. There are, groups of cloistered people, such as, monks who are on severe calorie restriction or totally avoid the sun, and they seem to live quite a bit a long time. But of course, they're also genetically homogenous, and they do a lot of other things in their life that are very different than what we do every day. So it's hard to say that it's just the calorie restriction. Some people believe that calorie restriction makes a big difference. They point to rat and mice models. And of course, I'd argue that, again, rat and mice models do not always pan out into human beings. Nevertheless, people are looking for secrets to live a long, long, long time. So part of the thing is okay, but everyone's still going to die of something, and you can restrict your calories and still have an accident, or get cancer, or get a heart disease, or have a stroke, or many, many other things that happen. So I'm not totally on board with the idea, personally, of making my life miserable in order to theoretically extend it on the back end by 10 or 20 years when there's no guarantee of that anyway. And that is why we often talk about sort of weighing risks and harms in the show. I like scotch. I like apple pie. And once in a while, I want to have those things, even if they theoretically increase my risk of death, by some small amount over the course of my lifetime. Same thing with meat, as we've talked about. There are tiny, tiny risks there, but I'm okay with that. I'm not going to restrict everything for the potential, not even guarantee, of having a few extra years in the back end. Now, if they can figure out how to avoid cell death at a molecular level and how to truly make the body regenerate, that'd be a huge deal. So that's why I'm from a science perspective, go to town. We're nowhere near that yet. We've not come close. But always remember that evolution is a power. Well, although this really wouldn't be evolution, because evolution would only care about getting the genes out, and that would happen long before longevity. So let me take that back. But I don't know that there are some truly lifestyle modifications that we could take that would make us all live to be like 110. I just don't see it. I've not seen any good studies or evidence to do that, and therefore I'm not pushing for it. Let's stop there. There are a couple questions left, but we can push them for next week, which we'll be happy to do. We are doing Healthcare Triage live next week. Please watch Healthcare Triage News on Friday. Watch Healthcare Triage next Monday. Go back and watch Opioid Month again, or tell your friends about it, because it was awesome. And we again thank the National Institute of Healthcare Management for their support in helping us to produce those videos, because we are so proud of the way that they turned out. Patreon.com/healthcaretriage. We'd really appreciate any support you can give us. Same with hctmerch.com. Check out Facebook page, facebook.com/healthcaretriage, and the Reddit page as well, where we often get some of these questions, and it's a perfectly good place to look. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.